In verses 5 through 16, Jude will continue to teach and show us who these men were that crept in unnoticed. He's going to describe through a series of Old Testament illustrations, analogies, and descriptive language who these men were, what the danger they posed, the character, and their activity. You're also going to notice in these verses that there are some very difficult things to understand. Even experienced biblical scholars are not agreed upon what Jude is writing in a few of these verses. You're also going to notice that in such a short span, it is packed full of historical content, so we could actually move through the section quite slowly. And you will also notice that this passage is a lot like 2 Peter chapter 2. So what I would encourage you to do is I would encourage you to read this letter along with 2 Peter chapter 2. Now in this session, we're going to be looking at 3 Old Testament illustrations that Jude uses. And it begins in verse 5. 3 Old Testament examples that Jude wants his readers to remember. And he says, "Now I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe." The church that he's writing to would have understood this Old Testament event. The event where the Israelites were rescued from Egypt through the supernatural work of God and the 10 plagues to break the back of Pharaoh, which caused him to allow the people, the Israelites, to leave. But then after they had left, they began to not believe or trust God for who he was. And this is an event that you're going to see over and over again in the wilderness experience. And I've listed a few of them in your notes of what Jude could be referring to. The big ones would be their disbelief right after they had crossed the Red Sea. They believed that God had led them into the wilderness just to kill them. And so they built a golden calf and worshipped it and ascribed onto that golden calf the name Yahweh and looked to it to lead them back out. This, as we remember, led to the destruction of 3,000 people being killed through the hand of God. Another event that could be in view here is just that moment before they went in, when they were at the border of the promised land. It was there that they sent 12 spies in ahead of them to scout out the land, and 10 of them came back. And gave an unfaithful report that they would be crushed like grasshoppers. They did not believe God. They did not trust that he was powerful enough to give him that land, and they all trembled, and they disobeyed God's command to enter into that land. And the unfaithful Israelites were sentenced to judgment to walk around the wilderness for 40 years. On a side note, what's very interesting here is typically we think of God or Yahweh as the one who was with them, who led them out of Egypt and into the promised land. Here we see the name Jesus, which is very fitting also because Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 parallels Christ, Jesus, with the rock and with the one who was with them that whole trip. We go on and read the second Old Testament example, And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Now, this is another one of those very perplexing verses that we don't fully understand. We don't know what Jude has in mind here. There are two different camps. The first camp is based on Genesis chapter 6, where it's believed that the angels had sexual relationships with the daughters of men. There's a few strengths to this camp. One of them is the non-canonical book of First Enoch shares about this event, and the language here in Jude actually parallels that book quite well, especially in First Enoch chapter 12 verse 4, chapter 10 verse 4, and chapter 10 verse 6. Also, Jude connects the next verse that is about Sodom and Gomorrah and their sin of pursuing unnatural relationships with the angels. So those are two strengths for this camp. A couple weaknesses is, how would an angel, which is a spiritual being, be able to have a sexual relationship with a physical being? One plausible explanation could be that of demon possession, an angel taking or inhabiting the body of a person to have a sexual relationship with another. Another weakness is when you actually read Genesis 6, that the preceding verse is actually a lineage of Seth. So the family lineage, talking about real people, not angels, precedes Genesis 6. So it's probably most likely in Genesis 6, it's the relationship between the line of Seth and the line of Cain. There's a second camp, and that is that this verse refers to a general rebellion against God resulting from pride and covetousness. There's implications of this in the Old Testament, such as Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, where Satan leads a rebellion against God because Satan desires the place of God, and he leads a host of angels with him to try to usurp God. And this also fits the thoughts or the theme of Jude, where these false teachers are those who rebel against authority. Now, we're not 100% sure of what Jude has in mind, but one thing that he does point out is that these angels, whatever they did, were kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of that great day. Now, we don't have to think of this in a physical sense. How do you physically chain an angel? I don't know. What is most likely in view here is chained as in they are permanently attached to the judgment that is upon them, and they can never escape that judgment because of that wicked deed that they did. There's another Old Testament historical event or illustration that he uses, and that's in verse 7. It says, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. We are very familiar with Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities. They were a very lush and an outwardly beautiful place. It was compared to that of like Eden, but inwardly they were dark and depraved. The sin that is in view here is the sin of sexual immorality, especially that of seeking unnatural desires or pursuing unnatural desires, referring to the sin of homosexuality. And because of their sin, it is said that they were destroyed. They were destroyed by fire. And this fire, this physical fire that consumed the cities, was a reminder of the fires of hell that has engulfed them for all eternity. Now, Jude wants to remind his readers about these three Old Testament historical events. Now the question is, why? Now there's three reasons. Number one, each example emphasizes the truth that all those who oppose God will be judged. There is no escape for those who disobey God and continue to disobey him. There's only one way out, and that is through trusting Jesus and his finished work. He also wants them to remember these because these three events, what has happened in these three events, are characteristics of what the false teachers are now doing. They are guilty of the same thing, and we will see that when we get into verse 8. Also, he wants to remind the church about this because the church has forgotten or was beginning to forget. He says, now I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it. So they were beginning to forget. And when you go further into the book of Jude, when he gives us how we are to contend for the faith, he will say that we must remember what has been written to build ourselves up in the doctrines of the Christian faith. In order for us to win the war on truth, we need to know the truth. We need to build ourselves up and not forget what has happened in the past.